I'm Connor Old, and welcome back to another episode of Old on Old. And this week we're covering the American epic, the movie that tapped into the culture of its time, The Grapes of Wrath. So, if you're new to the series, what I do every single week is I break down a classic film and I talk about A, does it hold up, and sort of the historical context of why it's a classic film. And all these classic films that I'm watching are movies I'm watching for the very first time. So I have a unique perspective of looking at it from a 2018 viewpoint and seeing what I like about it or what I don't like about it, and really does it work for a modern day moviegoer like myself. That being said, this is a unique one, The Rapes of Wrath, because after 7 episodes, finally, I thought it was going to happen one time, but it happened this time. I don't like this movie. This is a movie I don't like. This is a classic movie that does it hold up? No. I thought that after a while, I would eventually not like a movie. I think this one does not hold up, and I covered this movie because I'm doing a John Ford Masters of Controlled Chaos, which I've already recorded. It was a super long one. It's a lot of fun. It's really, I go really in depth. It's really well done, I think. I'm very proud of it, and that's coming up on Sunday, so check that one out. But I was launching a lot of John Ford movies for the first time, so I wanted to pick a John Ford movie. But then I realized that I could have picked a movie like The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, who is a somewhat classic movie on its own right. It's a movie I saw for the first time, and I really enjoyed. I found that movie to be really great, but I didn't choose that movie because I think this series could get stale this way. If you I just sort of talk about classic movies, and I like all the classic movies. Now, is there a high likelihood I will like all the classic movies? Yes, because they're classic movies for a reason. They're great movies that I haven't seen before. But I want to choose this movie because I think the series will get stale if I just talk about how much I loved about these classic movies. I want to talk about a movie that doesn't resonate, a reason that maybe some people think it's a classic movie, but it didn't resonate with me. It's differing of opinions. Now, the reason why I don't do this for every movie, just talk crap on these movies, how bad they are, because my show ultimately isn't a negative show. I don't want it to have a negative connotation. That being said, I think that there's a amount of respect that I have to sort of garner. If I like everything, well then I don't have an opinion in that sense. But I really want to display that I do have an opinion. That I didn't like this movie, and I'll explain why. Really, the categories of these films are that I break down into. It's like either I love this movie and I love everything about it. These sort of old movies, I break these down to 3 categories. I either love it, I love everything about it, or I love it, but there's some problems with it, or in this scenario where I don't like it, but there are some good things about it. I do recognize, I want to see that at the top of the show, I do recognize why this is a classic movie, and I do understand uh, why it had the impact it did at the time. I just don't think it holds up today for a modern day movie goer. So let's go into the historical context. This movie was released in 1940, based on a great American novel, a sort of American novel that's seen, that's really good as well. It came out in 1939. This movie came out in 1940, so they came out right about the same time. They knew it would be a big hit, the book, and it was. And the movie also was a big hit because it really tapped into the film's culture at the time. You have to understand, 1939, 1940. This is uh, the before America has entered the war, but the war is everything all people think about because they're having another world war. Japan's in it, all of Europe's in it, Canada's in it, and something like the United States, who wasn't in World War One, or sort of briefly in World War One, and has sort of been a neutral country and sort of an isolationist nation, is they're in a unique point where they're thinking of going to the war, but they're not sure. And there's this really great sort of doom and gloom going on in this time. The Great Depression is still going on. It's starting to cover a bit, but this is lasting for longer than a lot of people think. I mean, 10 plus years, or not 10 years really. And then there's this war happening in Europe, and they're like, Hitler, this guy, he's winning, he's taking over country. It's really dark and grim time for American audiences at the time. So we see this movie that focuses on this family in the Great Depression who lives in Oklahoma and gets their farm shut down, and they have to move to California for a new, better experience. And they sort of realize that it's tough and it's not going to be easier, and you can't just move to a place that's all bright and new. That you still have to work hard. And this movie won 2 Oscars, one Best Director for John Ford, and won Best Supporting Actress for Jane Darwell. However, despite it sort of tapping into the cultural appreciation of its time, and I think that's why it's sort of sustained as a classic, I think that this movie doesn't hold up today. The main problem I have with it is its pace. This movie is dreadfully and painfully slow. Nothing really happens, and the characters, you can't really identify with them because they're not developed well enough. There's nothing happens, and you just sort of watch these characters and you don't understand any of them. A good part of it is Henry Fonda's performance. I thought he was an incredible job in it, but that's also a negative in a way because he takes away so much of the other characters. He makes the other actors look bad, and then it's sort of just Henry Fonda's character and then an amalgamation of everyone else as sort of the family. Another thing I didn't like about it is that it's so overt, and there's no subtlety in this movie at all. There's these long monologues where they explain how poor they are and how hard it is, and it's like, they're not poor, they're not even really poor, they're super poor, and they're going to explain it to you, and they're going to hit you over the head a million times with it. And I felt that it wasn't treating the audience with enough respect. John Fords a lot of times have a certain rhythm to them, a certain poetry, a lot of people say, and I think this one fails in it. At certain points it does have this poetry and rhythm, but other points it's sporadic and chaotic, and it's like, Jesus, where did this come from? It's kind of all over the place in what movie it wants to be, and what it's almost also so overt, and the dialogue is really just, you can't help almost but to roll your eyes in some scenarios. I was really disappointed by this because I think it almost sort of translated the book and filled it onto the movie. There was no cinematic flair to it. It just took these super long monologues and gave it to these characters that totally don't work for the film, and they're totally out of place. And I don't know if it's trying to be realistic. It seemed like it was, but then the way that people were talking as well was like totally out of here. I mean, I wasn't even a fan of the performances. Jane Darwell did do a pretty good job, but I don't know the competition that year that well. Overall, I was kind of disappointed. I mean, some people see this as a sort of high watermark in John Ford's career, but I much rather prefer even something like How Green Was My Valley. At least that had good cinematography. But I think, like I said, Henry Fonda's performance, I am a fan of that. I'm also a fan of John Ford's sort of courage not to cut away, just to keep it on Henry Fonda, because he's so good in this movie. That being said, I still think that it just doesn't hold up, it doesn't work. And I think for modern day movie audience, moviegoer sort of, it requires a lot of patience, and I don't think it deserves that. It doesn't earn that patience to really understand these characters. And maybe with another viewpoint, maybe with age, I'll understand this movie. But at this time, I would not recommend this movie to someone. Unfortunately, this was an old on old that is unfortunately negative, but these ones have to exist because I don't like every single movie, and I want to talk about sort of the way these classic movies, a lot of them have a super slow pace. That's just the fact of it, and I think that the good ones sort of earn that pace, and I think still captivate the audience. But for a modern day moviegoer like myself, who is sort of accustomed to these high-paced action blockbusters, I think that if your movie is slow, you have to have an extra element that keeps me engaging. And I think a lot of these classic movies, Superman doesn't have that much action. The Treasure of Sierra Madre is slow. A lot of these John Ford westerns that I watch are also very slow, but they earn them, and I like that. But The Razor Wrath doesn't. I feel it's really choppy in its editing and how it moves through the story, and I don't care about the characters, and I don't like the dialogue. There's not too much really I do like aside from Henry Fonda's performance and sort of the respect I have for John Ford in terms of elevating that performance and not cutting away. But anyways, guys, unfortunately this was a negative video, but they have to exist, so make sure to comment below, let me know some of your favorite John Ford movies. Stay around to the Sunday's episode of Masters of Control Cast. That should be a really fun one, and until next time, stay tuned.